This talk is actually wanting to get clear why executives need to attend to value streams, what they can do, why it's so important to do this. And it gives us insights into what we can actually do that helps leadership be involved. And it's, in my mind, this is the next shift. We've gone from waterfall or big designs up front, however you want to call it, to be from a predictive response to a more adaptive, quick change response with Agile. But there's still some issues, I believe, in all of this. And I want to be clear that the background for this talk is that we need to come from an executive's perspective. One of the reasons leadership hasn't bought in a lot in the Agile space is because a lot of people are always talking to them about Agile, and actually they don't really care. They care about other things. You know, executives are going to, they don't care about this engine of Agile or Lean or Kanban or anything like that. It's not that it's not important, but that's not what their main concerns are. They care about what they care about, and I'm trying to be a little funny there, but we don't need to change what they care about. We need to address what they care about. Okay, so one of the things we have to recognize is that the pace of innovation is accelerating. It continues to accelerate. I got into software in 1970, 71 when I started university. I got into business, I guess that was around 78 or so. Before that, I was in university doing technical and scientific applications. And I remember in the 80s, getting something done in a year in a major company. Mini computers were often being used then. Microcomputers had not really, they hit, the PC had come out, but it wasn't a serious computer as yet. Most big companies were on mini computers, and it took a year. A year would be considered fast to get something done. 2 years wouldn't be unusual. So this pace of innovation is greatly accelerating. And keeping up is no longer enough. That, you know, if a company goes bankrupt, we see this now, that it's almost the norm that large companies go bankrupt, because once a company gets ahead of yours, well, they got ahead of yours by going faster. If they keep going faster, they're going to keep going further ahead. So we have to recognize innovation is really a critical piece, and it really is a concern of executives. So we hear in Agile, a lot of this, Agile's like a bottom-up adoption, you know, get Scrum teams going and then expand. People talk about scaling Agile, and I don't know what Dean Leffingwell now says, but I remember when I was in SPCT, that a common refrain from him was you can't have an Agile organization unless you have Agile teams. And SAFe starts out with the essential SAFe level, which is the team level. You start at the team and then you go up and do more solutions and product management and PMO kind of stuff. And people recognize, well, you know, that's not really working. As if you don't attend to the whole, you're not going to get actually a good result. So this notion that we have to do top-down leadership with bottom-up implementation is a common refrain. But there's a problem here, and a lot of people don't notice this problem, and this is a key problem. I'm going to let you reflect. What's the problem of top-down, bottom-up? And I'm going to suggest it's because of what you're looking at. You're looking at hierarchy. And maybe we shouldn't be looking at hierarchy. Maybe we should be looking at value streams. Maybe we're looking at the wrong thing. We're doing better looking at the wrong thing is not doing the right thing. So consider, first of all, what value streams are. Okay, they're basically the steps it takes for work to go from the initial idea till it is consumed by the customer. Sometimes this has been called concept to cash, but that's not really what it is, because you might get paid for it, but until the customer gets value for it, you haven't completed the value stream. And actually, I think that's not a great way to summarize it, because it gets us focused on the deployment and has us ignore the fact that people are going to have to look at, how do I support the system? How do I sell the system? How do I make sure people are happy? It goes way beyond things. So that's really the value stream. Okay, so let's step back. So what do executives want? This is something we have to stop. If we're going to talk to executives, we have to understand what they want. I've already talked about innovation being important. The pace of innovation is critical. Okay, well, what else do they want? They want to avoid the waste of developing products that aren't useful because that adds cost, slows response of things. It's the antithesis of what's needed. Be able to quickly deliver value at a reasonable cost because if it's too expensive, you won't make money. Be able to provide a customer experience with both great products and excellent service. Have an effective sales organization. Because if you can't sell the product, it really doesn't matter how good it is. You want an excellent work environment for the employees because you want to retain good employees. You want to make people better. And you want to lower your risk because you don't want bad things to happen. Okay, so just reflect on this. All these things, when you look at them, are things that Agile professes to do. So we don't have to talk about what Agile does. We can talk about how do we get what executives want because it's fairly good. I want to go through each one of these a little bit. So innovation for customers, okay. Innovation comes in lots of different ways. It can be really, it's about how they live and work better. We want to lower prices. We want to have improved quality. The first requires attending to how customers work. In fact, they have their own value streams in this sense. How do they use and interact with your products? Achieving lower prices and higher quality requires us to improve ours. So sometimes our view is on them and sometimes our view is on us. And we need to attend to that. We want to avoid the waste of developing products that are not useful because obviously we don't want to do that, but what we have to do is these quick little cycles. This is why Agile talks about quick iterations and fast feedback. That if we attend to the value stream, we attend to the work we're doing, we can have as part of the value stream, one of the steps being to get feedback on a continual basis. Deliver value at a reasonable cost quickly. Well, look to see when you've worked in a company and look at the steps you didn't need to do, or the steps maybe you needed to do because of some other step. Like if a bug was introduced, well, you got to take it out. But why was the bug introduced? What caused that? If there was a misunderstanding. So misunderstanding of requirements and then fixing it, all that work is not necessary. That's work that's waste. We could take that out. Okay. By removing waste, we lower costs, we speed the time to delivery. It's all good. In a sense, what I'm doing here is I'm setting up some first principles if you reflect on it and think about it. By being able to create a great customer experience with great products and services, we're going to get retention. We're going to get customers who want to work with us. Okay? Customers don't always know what they want to do. That's I don't think it's a true statement, but there's a story that when Henry Ford said, if I did what my customers wanted, if I asked what my customers wanted, they'd have said faster horses. I'm not sure that was really true, but that is how people think. If people are thinking, we need faster transportation, they often don't get out of their own way because of cognitive bias and historical thinking. Okay. We need effective sales. Sales need to work with the development organizations. A lot of times companies stumble on that last bit. They've got a product, but they're not ready to market it because sales wasn't involved. So they have to work together. That's part of the value stream. Part of the development value stream needs to be including sales and things. Great work environment. This is kind of obvious. People are an incredible value to an organization. The most value to the organization in many ways. And if you aren't able to support your employees, they're not going to work well, they're not going to stay. And of course, low risk, because risks just cause waste, they cause all sorts of problems, you lose customer confidence, employee confidence, things of that nature. So we really have to attend to all of these things. So let's step back. There are lots of value streams going on. And it's more than just the value streams that are going on, or that there are lots of value streams. There's this whole issue of is there a way to look at them, to look at the value streams? So there are many different ways. Many different people have come up with ways. Some of the breakthrough work in what value streams are in value stream mapping, they've identified 14 and all that. What I like to do, however, is try to simplify a start in how you think about it. So I'm not saying, I'm not one of these keep everything simple, because to be candid, sometimes that gets simplistic. But a quick, clear, concise way of looking at value streams, I think, is important. And I like to look at it that there are three types. And the first one, and the most important one, is the customer value stream. In other words, how are they getting their work done? Like when I have a I buy a speaker, then what? How do I use it? Well, I got to turn it on. I got to connect it to my computer. I've got volume controls and things like that. That might be a simple value stream. If I'm going onto a financial investment system, then I might, well, how do I log in and how do I get onto my account, and then how do I look at my investments, and then how do I decide what to invest in? That's my value stream. And notice I'm interacting with the system as I do it. That's called the customer journey. We'll talk more about that as well. This is one of the key ones. Now, there's I see the question, and that's a good question. How to increase customer centricity for a platform value stream which serves many stakeholders and customers? This is actually really key, and we'll get to that. That's a great question, because this is the issue as well. So it's really good that's brought up now, even though I'll answer it later, because I want to create some background thinking first. But we have a value stream that's building a product, but it could be to serve several customers who have different value streams. That's, I think, what the point is. Or they want to have different value streams, or they have different purposes. So there's this issue of what am I building this for? And to think about it as, well, there's a customer, that's not always a way to do it, because there's not one customer, there are lots of different kinds of customers. I prefer to use the word stakeholders, which you have there, stakeholders, customers. This is perfect, because they're actually different. The customer is important, but it's not the only important person. This notion that we do everything around the customer is kind of a little silly. If you think about it, and I joke about this, Microsoft, I know, gets a really good deal on furniture. But I would like to get a good deal on furniture. Why don't they sell it to me at their low cost? That would make me happy as a customer. See, it doesn't make sense to just focus on customers. You have to look at the business stakeholders. And you're right, most executives don't pay attention to value streams. I'm talking about value streams so they can understand why they're important. They're not aware of the cost of not paying attention to it. So if they're focusing on money and things of that nature, why would they want to attend to the customer value stream? So that's what we're getting to. If value streams are really important and executives aren't paying attention to it, you have a serious problem. So this talk is actually about why you need to be able to explain to them why they do care about value streams, or they should care about value streams. And you're right, they don't. This is a major problem we have. There are also operational value streams. Now, maybe you don't talk about it quite the way I'm talking about it, but that's a possibility for sure. So operational value streams are how we do our business, like HR and support and marketing and things of that nature. How do we build these things? Development value streams, and I'm going to call them networks here, because development value streams are they're not really linear this way. So let's take a look at these three. And I'm trying to make the case for attending to them, why it's so important. And then we'll come back to these questions about that they're different customers, different stakeholders, and executives aren't paying attention to it, which is, if you think about it, if you got something that they're not paying attention to and they should be paying attention to, that's why this talk is important. So, customer value streams, how they get value from our products and services. And as I mentioned, this term, the customer journey, it's the intersection of how they work with our system, because they might do things outside of interacting with the system. They may have something where they're checking an Excel sheet they have or something that's not our system in the financial example. Okay, so we can improve their work by having the customer journey influence it. And I'm going to give a simple example of this. Okay, so let's say we develop a system and the customer's operational value stream is basically how they get their work done, and it interacts with it. So here's a simple example. The customer journey is that interaction. So this isn't a software IT example, but it illustrates the point. So there are refrigerators they make now that are like this, where they have a door and a door. Okay, I actually bought one, not this one, but I bought something like this. It's really cool. So in other words, here they have both doors open, and you don't actually usually open it that way, but you can see that. Let's say the door right here, this middle door, were closed, but I can open this door, and what I do is it's actually got a glass part of the door, so I can see these drinks. And when I want a drink, I just open the outer door, I pull out the drink I want, I close the outer door, and notice I don't make the inside warm because the air doesn't escape, because this door is closed. Now what's happened is I've lowered my electricity costs, I've got it where drinks are available. And notice this affects some things that are outside of this, which is I stock the refrigerator differently now. I stock my drinks that I want to get to here. Now this makes my work using the refrigerator a lot more effective because I'm lowering electricity, I'm getting access to what I want. I do have to change how I stock it. And this is an example. The customer journey is how I'm interacting with the system called the refrigerator. So this is very important. Now, by the way, I did not know I needed one of these until I saw it. Wow, that's so cool. No pun intended. So this is an example of that. Okay, operational value streams, support, marketing, HR, legal, all the things inside a company that we use to do things. Okay, and then the development value stream networks. And I call them a network because they're not more linear. They're not as linear as the other ones are. So I just want to point out, it's not really a stream, still a metaphor. They cut and cross and go across the way. But these are what build the operational value streams of the customer and our internal operational value stream. Now, by thinking about these three this way, what we've done is we give us a simple way to look at value streams, a simple classification. I'm not trying to have this be a limiting thing. What I'm suggesting is that it lets us have a focus on the customer. It lets us have a focus on our own internal support to the customer, and then we recognize we have a way of building all of those. So that's really why I think these are so critical. Okay, so attending to the value streams, well, if we're aware of them, just being aware of them, we can see our work better. Okay, we can see how they interact with each other. When making a change in how work's being done, we can see how it affects the overall productivity in the value stream and any related value streams. Now, you have to ask yourself, how am I going to attend to all this? What am I going to do? Who's going to do this? You're not going to get this by looking at an individual team in a value stream. It's just too low or localized to focus. So it's not that executives are going to do this work. Not at all. I don't expect they will. But they better enable they better enable the work that's required to do this, because they're the ones who set that up, what's possible in the organization. So that's why also they should be aware of what's going on. Okay, if you have visibility of what's going on, I mean, just stop for a second and consider in an organization you've been, where say a bunch of developers let operations know 2 weeks before deployment that, hey, we need 1,000 servers for this. I've seen that happen, by the way. I think the number was larger than 1,000. I mean, now maybe it's not so hard because you've got the cloud and you've got people who can set it up. But I remember that happening. It was like 10 or 15 years ago. And it's like, oh my God, how can they possibly get that equipment in place? Why didn't they tell them ahead of time? Well, there wasn't visibility. There wasn't clarity on what work was going on. I was talking to an associate yesterday, and we were looking at what's the biggest problem. And it's like nobody really knows what's going on in the company. I mean, something comes in, it gets approved, but it's all over in different places. How can you manage that if you can't see what's going on? So this visibility by looking at work in the value streams and how they interact is very, very important. Who's responsible for that? Just stop and think about it. Otherwise, people are going to just do their own little thing. So who's responsible for coordinating this, for setting that up? You know, value streams show us where the delays are when we think about it. It shows us the constraints in the system as well. I mean, where are we going to find these things if we're not looking at the value stream? That's very important to be attending to. And this is why this is so critical. This comment from Edgar Schein: we do not think and talk about what we see. We see what we are able to think and talk about. Is really, really critical. And I want to spend a minute or two thinking about this. The ramifications of this are that what we talk about is what we see. And if we're not talking about it, we don't see it. Our reality shows up in our speaking, in our languaging, as some people have called it. So if you're not talking about things that are important, you're not going to notice them. And maybe you'd see them if you looked at them, but you don't look at them because you're not talking about them. It's this downward cycle of invisibility. It's our normal practice of how we look at things, how we talk about things, limits us. If we're talking about getting great teams and we're not talking about how do they work together, if we're talking about hierarchies. We're not looking at value streams. So in a lot of ways, this whole way we manage people takes us off the focus of what we should be doing. The ramifications are quite large. A value stream goes end to end, so it lets us see everything because we're talking about things. And we're going to, I hope to demonstrate, to let you understand that talking about value streams is more effective than talking about hierarchies. And let's see why, basically. So think about it. What are hierarchies? How we're organized, that this person has all these people reporting to them, and this person has all these people reporting to them. What difference does that make? What does that look like when that happens? Okay, so when we have a management structure like this, we're going to ask, are people working on the right things? Are they working well? Are they fully occupied? Okay, we measure their productivity by how much and well people are working on what we think are the right things. Now, 2 points here. One is this looks so natural. It's like, what do you mean, Al? Of course you'd be looking at that. Well, that's a trap of the system. This is what we're talking about. This is what we're looking about. But I suggest that's not really what we want to be doing, because there's no way you can get true productivity measure of value based on what this one individual is doing. Maybe what they're doing is helping their step, but it might be causing problems elsewhere, and you won't notice that if you're not looking at it. This was one of the key problems with waterfall, especially in manufacturing. You'd make, like, one machine was going great and it would make lots and lots and lots of stuff, but it would back up parts before something else. One of the ideas of Kanban in software and IT is that you're not going to do that. You're not going to have these big delays between the workflows, because when you do, you get waste and time lost because of it. So productivity measures of individuals is not what we want. Even productivity measures of teams is not what we want, or in silos. Okay. But now let's think about this. Okay. I want you to think about a time when something was built. So an item got suggested. Notice it waits, by the way, for the team to go through suggestions to decide what's happening. Hey, it got approved. Awesome. But now it waits for a team to be able to work on it. Or it gets dumped into a team's already busy schedule. There's not a team waiting for it typically. So they work on it until it needs somebody outside the team, because maybe the team doesn't have everything they need. This is, by the way, why cross-functional teams are good, because they should have everything they need. But in larger companies, this doesn't take place. There are things that are outside the team. Maybe not a lot, but some. So guess what? It waits for that person or that team. The person needed now needs to wait. Well, they work on it, on this. So in other words, this person we've interrupted for our work, their work now waits. So when we use another team, we're waiting on them, but the work they were doing now waits. Then the work comes back, but they need to wait for us to be able to talk to us, or they give it to us in a bad way, and a handoff's done, and misinterpretations. Now you might notice what's going on here is an awful lot of waiting of the work. But pay attention to the people doing the work. They're busy, they're multitasking, they're doing all sorts of things. So when we focus our ideas on the people and not the work, we see people busy, we don't even notice the work is not busy at all. Most of the time it's waiting. Okay, so when you're organized around these hierarchies and these local optimizations, this is what normally happens. This is a key insight of lean thinking and systems thinking, is that systems inform behavior. And the structures we use inform the behaviors we get. So if we're focusing on these hierarchies and how people are doing, then we're going to make them be more locally optimized, and we're going to run into problems. So typically no one's even looking at the time that work in the value stream is slow or not. Okay. So let's actually have a little table here that just mentions what I said. Let's look at watching people watching the workflow. Well, people are busy. Well, I guess that's good. Actually, it's not, because that causes more waiting and the work stops and starts. They're multitasking. But otherwise, we'll see people multitasking. Well, if we watch the workflow, we'll see the work items stop and spend time in queues. We're focusing on the work, but nobody's managing the work itself, meaning across the organization. People are measured on how busy they are, not on how much overall value is being done. They may be working at something that's not important. If you're working on something that's not a time constraint for getting delivery, you're you're wasting effort. You should be working on what's constraining the delivery of the system. This is the idea of the theory of constraints. Work is typically tracked where it is, but how much time work spends waiting is not tracked. So yeah, I could go in, I could look at Jira, and I could see what's happening. Oh, my work's here, and everything looks great. But I don't notice that to go from A to B took a long time. Or maybe from C to D was fast, but we didn't need it to be fast. And a lot of people say, oh yeah, that's possible, we can do that. Well, you know what? I have been in companies as a consultant, and I always ask a quick question. Well, can you tell me how much time your work is waiting? And they say, oh yeah, we can. And then I'll say, okay, could you show me? And then 15 minutes later, they say, well, I know it's in there someplace. And it's like, okay, well, maybe it is. But that's like me with my keys. You know, I know it's in there someplace. You're not tracking it well if you can't get at it. Okay. So if you can't manage it if you don't see it. And I would suggest that means seeing it often, continuously, not every now and then. Okay. Interacting value streams slow each other down because you're basically one waits for the other as you go. Okay. Local changes can slow value delivery because maybe somebody who's useful for some other place on the value stream is too busy optimizing their part. I did this work with a company where they had a lot of problems. It wasn't that big a group. It was about 75 developers and stuff. But they had a constraint on how they can test platforms. And they had 7 different teams working together. And each team was responsible for some software device on a fighting aircraft. There were 7 major devices and 7 teams, one for each. And they worked together very well, but we had a team for each one of these. And testing was a real problem. And one of the teams was clearly the best team when you looked at speed of delivery and all that. It was a very small team, actually. The problem was that they had limited test capacity because this equipment was old and they couldn't actually test it on their PC. They could write it in some sort of compiler thing they had. But to actually run it required a simulator that had been built, or some test platforms that used equipment from the plane itself. And what they saw when I showed them value stream analysis and how value was to be delivered, they saw that one item that required multiple teams to be involved, that this team needed to slow down their work. They needed to make themselves available to the other teams as needed to get stuff done, because otherwise it would go back and forth as you test it. So when you again focus on local changes, well, my team's better than ever, whatever, you don't focus on things that would actually create greater value. And it was really great because we had about a 2 or 3 day engagement with them, and I was teaching them lean and flow and stuff. And the manager of this small group, I can still remember this, it was really very inspiring. This guy would get up, I think after I gave them some basic analysis of things, he would get up in the afternoon of the first day and he would say, Al, you know, if what you say is true, and I believe it is, then my team should slow down. But I don't want to slow down. He's very candid. Brave, too, because his manager was in the room. And he did that a couple hours later. And then the morning of the next day, he came up and said the same thing. But around lunchtime of the second day, he said, you know, Al, if what you say is true, my team needs to slow down. And you know what? We're going to slow down. We're going to help the other teams. And I still get goosebumps when I think about this, because this guy was saying, I'm really committed to our product, our purpose, why as an organization we're here, not my team being great. And it was clear he was no longer going to be the lead team. He was going to be the team that supported other teams. And that was actually true leadership. So, but he could only see this. And this was a manager, the team lead of the group. And he was a manager, but he was also on the team. This is an example of not looking at his silo, his product, but looking across. And that was really, it's still, I get goosebumps when I think about it. It's such a great thing. So we have to recognize that we have limited capacity in what we're going to do. We don't want to spend it on wasteful things. We want to work on the most important items to be effective. We need to be efficient as well. Okay. And we have to shift from managing people to improve the work environment is kind of summarized in this great quote by Edwards Deming. Deming is the man that basically the Japanese credit for changing how they went from poor manufacturers to great manufacturers, and is at the heart of the Toyota production system, which is later called Lean. And I don't go from manufacturing per se. You have to go underneath what Toyota did, see what first principles they're following, and then retranslate them into knowledge work. That's another story. But anyway, Deming said a system must be managed. It will not manage itself. Left to themselves, components, in our case as we're talking, maybe silos, become selfish, independent profit centers and destroy the system. The secret is cooperation between components toward the aim of the organization. Notice that's what this gentleman did. He recognized that he had to look toward the aim of the organization, not his own thing. Now, why he was able to do that is because I just showed and demonstrated that that's what they should be looking at. If we had talked about how each of the individual 7 teams got better, never would have made an improvement like we did. And it was dramatic. These people didn't do Agile before we got there. I remember I had an associate go in there for like a couple weeks training. We trained all the people in Scrum within the context of this bigger picture. It wasn't quite normal Scrum. And they saved a huge amount of money just like that. So it was like 2 days of big view by me, 2 weeks of training, and it was a quick transition because everybody was frustrated and they now saw what they could do. And the manager of the group said, yeah, let's do this. This saves us so much trouble. He was also awesome. Okay. So notice this is another aspect to pay attention to. That if you lower cost in silos, you actually increase the delays between the silos, or you probably will. Or you may. You're certainly not looking at it. So that increases costs because it increases delays. Local optimizations often result in higher costs overall. So this, again, we got to stop looking at the silos. We got to stop looking at the hierarchies. We got to start looking at the value streams. So, I'm going to go back to that comment. Most executives don't pay attention to value streams. They only focus on results, money-oriented, even after showing what it delivers to them, business and customers. How to make them aware is this is what I'm trying to do. Yeah, of course, they're interested in profit. They're interested in innovation. This is not a bad thing. They're interested in maintaining the organization. If you can show somebody that they're doing something wrong and here's a better way to do it. See, they don't need to notice how to manage value streams. They don't need to notice how you would set all this stuff up, but they need to notice that they need to have the movement of work across the organization be what they're paying attention to. And if they're not doing that, then they're not really doing their job. So you speak to them from they want all this good stuff, but the only way they're going to get it is by attending to the workflow. Because, by the way, what is the workflow? Think about it again. Well, we're starting something, we're getting it out to customers. So start saying, you know what? We want fast market. Quick time to market, don't we? So let's cut out all the delays in getting there. See, now you're talking their language. So that's how you do this. Okay. I just want to throw this in. There's a lot of nonsense that comes from the early 2000s. I mean, when Scrum started coming out into the world, and I was around. My first Scrum team was 2000, 2001. I was in the Scrum community early on. Net Objectives, my company, prior to being acquired by the PMI, and now I have my own company called Success Engineering. We were big into Scrum, and in those days, a big Scrum training company was 2CST, Certified Scrum Trainers. But the thing is, a lot of stuff that was said there or that was brought to light, and one of them is still around, even though it's not the right thing to focus on. Yeah, multitasking's bad. Yes, multitasking talks a 10-20% drop in efficiency. And yes, it might even be more than that. But I'll tell you, it's not the most important thing. What's more important are the delays that can be a magnitude error in costs and errors. Like if you write a bug and then it's not detected for weeks and there's no feedback, it might take you days to fix it. So this notion of focusing on multitasking, to me, is misdirected. Multitasking is a symptom of people working on too many things. But the real costs are the delays that working on too many things set up. So we want to focus on delays. And sometimes we talk about eliminate waste. In manufacturing, the mantra eliminate waste made a lot of sense because because you can see the waste. If a bumper falls off a car, you see it. You know, I joke, I've done this extensive analysis. Here, I'll change the angle of my computer. So I've done these studies where I brought developers in, and I was watching them while they coded. And this is what it looks like when developers are writing really good code without any bugs. This is what they're looking down, their hands are going like that. Okay, now, after extensive study analysis, we found what developers look like when they're writing bugs. Do you see the difference? No, neither do I. The point is you don't see it. You can't see it while it's taking place in knowledge work. Same thing, if you're doing knowledge work, you're not doing software, but you're thinking about certain problems. You don't see what's going on as it's going on, if it's right or wrong. This is where you need feedback. Waste is a symptom. Saying eliminate waste, well, that's great, I'd like it, but what's causing it? Okay, delays in the workflow. Because if you make a mistake and the longer it takes to detect it, whether it gets out in the field or not, it's going to cost you more. So we want to focus on delays and handoffs. Handoffs cause problems because typically things get stuck in the queue, or we at least lose information. If it's in the same team, maybe we just lose information enough. If it goes across teams, we have delays. So we want to eliminate delays and handoffs between teams. We have to do this with quick feedback. Notice everything I'm saying is consistent with Agile. There's nothing really new here. I'm just putting on a bigger picture view with flow and lean and theory of constraints. Now, this is a question you can ask an executive as to why they would care about this. Imagine there was an important initiative that had taken 6 months to complete. But on reflection, our team only worked on it about 2 months because they were working on a couple other things. Okay? You know, which is, you see the multitasking, you see all this. Now, what if you ask the executive, would you have been willing to pay 20% more to get this thing not done in 6 months, but in 2 months? In other words, get it 4 months sooner, would you pay 20%? Now, if it was a real important thing, they almost certainly would say yes. But let's think about this for a second. Would it take more or less or the same time to get it done by focusing on it? How are you going to get it to go from 6 months to 2 months? You're not going faster at the steps. You probably don't know how to do that. You're reducing the delays between the steps. But if you reduce the delays between the steps, you're going to eliminate a lot of the waste those delays cause. So it actually will take less time, not more time. But they'd be willing to pay for it more to get it done. This is what they need to see. So what's causing this? How are they causing this? I would suggest executives are causing this. They're causing this by this forced, let's get things started, instead of focusing on when can we get things done quicker. Okay. Now, sometimes there's a little extra slack involved. I'm not one of these who says put slack into IT, but sometimes you have to say, well, okay, this guy may not be busy because he's focusing on this important thing and we're not going to overload him. Or if we get him to do something, just make sure he knows to always work on the most important thing. Okay. But I'm suggesting that sometimes if people aren't totally utilized, I mean, I'm not saying I should underutilize them, but the fact that maybe they're not totally utilized, the cost of that, losing that capacity, is way less than the waste that trying to get every ounce of productivity out of people is. Okay, now this inherent problem, I may not have called it that, but what I call the inherent problem is that I'm focusing on hierarchies, but my work is sliding across the organization. My work is going across the organization, even though I'm focusing on the teams. So we have to shift our focus from people to the work. Don't manage the hierarchies, manage the value stream. Okay, don't try to go faster. Work on having fewer and smaller queues. I have to therefore work on the most important things. And I need to align people around the value to be realized. We have this incredibly simplistic view of totally cross-functional teams in an organization. And I've almost never seen that. It's not necessary. Fortunately, there are a lot of great books coming out. Team topologies, dynamic reteaming, organized for complexity. I'll create a bibliography and update the PDFs I sent that have these, because these are great books. Okay. We want to shift from focusing on the utilization of people to removing delays in the workflow. Okay, I'm almost through also with the presentation part, so I've got time for the questions. I see some good questions. We want to focus on eliminating handoffs between teams. This requires changing the value creation structure. That's the term that's been used for how people are organized, and that's an important thing. Okay. It's not possible to really determine an individual's true productivity. I already talked about that, how this team looked like they were doing good, but we really needed to shift. To this other way of looking about what's really happening. How does their work affect their teams and other teams? We have to look at that. We don't want to go faster. We're trying to remove delays and handoffs. So we're looking at something else. Now we're looking at something else, talking about something else, and taking a better view of things. Now, this requires direction from executives, the project management office, product management. We need to align people around the work to be realized. It's just not going to happen. Okay, Agile's weak in this area, by the way, because they don't talk about what you have to look at. I've had some dramatic improvement. I've had customers have dramatic improvement sometimes. I remember one client, and it's ironic because they've been described at a conference. I saw Jeff Sutherland once talk about this great company he got where they weren't doing Scrum well because they weren't organized properly, and they then reorganized into cross-functional Scrum teams, and now they could all collaborate and all that, and it was a great example. What he forgot to mention was that I was in there in between when he was there getting them started, and then they couldn't work together because they were trying so hard to just look at this team and this team and this team. And I actually introduced value stream management. And out of that, they saw how to reorganize into cross-functional teams. And sometimes you can do it, sometimes you can't do it, but you've got to keep the big picture of the value stream in there to create the context for what you're doing. Okay, Agile doesn't talk about this. They don't have an artifact, actually, that can be used to align teams. Something we've been using, and there'll be links here in the PDF. Minimum business increments is a construct we use to show this is what our next release is going to be, who's involved, who has to coordinate. It's not a big design up front. It's just a business statement of what's going to happen. Very powerful. I've seen companies change how they work just on this notion alone and make agreements about it. Steve Tendon's TameFlow has what he calls a minimum outcome value effort, or MOVE. The reference I have here is one he used to call it an MMR, minimum marketable release. You can talk about moves directly by getting his book, TameFlow, which I actually recommend. Brilliant, brilliant stuff. Okay. What executives have to do is demand visibility. This is part of it. We have to see what's going on. We have to focus on value streams and see the work in the value streams. And we have to change HR as needed, because if we're going to be having people be evaluated on how they do, then they're not going to look across the value stream. So executives have to say, this is how we're going to do things. And some of the biggest Scrum successes, actually Salesforce being one, which I had nothing to do with. I did have a guy there, but I won't claim any credit for what happened at Salesforce. But what was really interesting is they decided they're going to do Scrum, and the leader said anything that gets in the way of having effective teams, people aren't working well together, well, you come to me and I'll resolve it. And that's leadership there. But he was talking about it from we're looking at value. And if we've got something that's not giving us value, then we're going to change it. So in a sense, it wasn't just about the teams, it was about creating the big picture. Executives need to do this. I'm going to say one last thing as my last slide, and then we'll get into these questions. A lot of companies start at the team as a pilot for Agile. I've said this I discovered this about 15 years ago. This is not always a good idea. In other words, let's start a pilot. Let's start with a Scrum team. Well, look, you'll always get value just about from this. It doesn't solve the real problem. Why will you get value? Because you're coordinating. You got all these people who hadn't been working on one team. Now they're working on one team. They don't have to wait. All the delays go away. There are no handoffs to other teams. Of course you're going to get value. 3 to 10 times value just by putting them on the same team without interruption. In fact, if you do Scrum, you'll get another 3 times. And if you do test first, you'll get even another 3 times. By the way, 3 times 3 times 3. 27 is very close to the 30 times what Jeff Sutherland talks about hyper-performing teams. Coordinate them, have them focus. That improves the value stream. Have them do iterative development with Scrum. Have them do tests first. You'll get hyper-performing teams. But it doesn't solve the real problem, which is how do teams work across an organization when you're at scale, when you're bigger than a team. This is a very important thing. Okay, Let me say 2 minutes, take a minute about my company and where you can go for other information. Again, this will be in the PDF. This is how you can contact me. My company is Success Engineering at successengineering.works. You can get books. I'm in the process of writing 2 books right now. They're about half done. They're up on the website. One is The Path to Effective Lean-Agile Teams. This is actually, though, with a value stream perspective. It also shows how to do not just one team, but a few teams. And there's a workshop based on it. I call Ample Lean-Agile Teams Masterclass that's designed for people's busy schedule. It's instructor-led, but over time, not like a day or two intense. And Being a Professional Coach is another book that I started writing as part of this first one, because if knowing stuff's great, but if you don't know how to convey it, it's not okay. And I call it a professional coach. I don't mean money. I don't mean you're paid to do a coach. I mean your attitude as a professional. You're making a difference with people. The focus isn't on you, it's on helping others. Okay, so amazingly, I'm pretty good on time. I'm going to go through these questions. So any tips to increase customer centricity for a platform value team which serves many stakeholders? And the answer is yes. You have to first identify the stakeholders. You have to identify the values the stakeholders have. And you need to come up with a way of coordinating and matching these. And this is where the minimum business increment is useful, because what you'll end up with is an artifact that kind of consolidates that information. Now, how to do that, I can't answer in 10 minutes here online. But we have ways of doing this. This is one of the things we talk about in our master class. So we actually have 2. One is this team level, and the other one is, the Discipline Agile Value Stream Consultant workshop talks a lot about this. So those are some other references. I think I answered this other ones about most executives don't pay attention to. This whole workshop, this whole seminar is how to get them to be more aware of that. If I did not answer that enough, you can put another question in. What metrics to be used to measure the productivity of Agile teams? The best collection of metrics I've seen for this is Tame Flow's, not Tame Flow's. He's got some great ones too, but one that's more codified is TaskTop's flow metrics. Mick Kirsten wrote a great book called Projects to Products, and he calls them flow metrics. And if you're not careful, you could just be, oh, these are great, they're wonderful. That's because they are great, they are wonderful. But it turns out they're really just lean metrics that he's kind of branded, which more power to him because he does a great job. So I would look at the flow metrics in Mick Kirsten's Project to Product. Okay, another example of the customer value stream and how it impacts the operational value streams. Let's see. Well, one comes to mind. It may not be. This is also an example of innovation. So believe it or not, a lot of people think this is hysterical, but I don't know why. But in the 80s and 90s, I was involved in the hair salon business. I'm not in the business of cutting hair. In fact, I was a bad client. I would never go to hair salons. But I wrote software for hair salons, and I actually worked with a distributor. They bought my software because they wanted me to come up with a way of having more retail, use the software to promote more retail. So there are 2 things that are interesting here. The first one is when I started writing the software, why did I write good software? Okay, and this is actually an example of the customer journey, and then I'll bring this back to your question. So when we did this, when I first started writing this, it was kind of like the late 80s, early 90s. I think it was more early 90s. And we had a problem. People were in the hair salons were not used to computers, and they didn't want to touch computers. And I mean, sometimes one person would learn it, but we wanted to teach more people how to learn it. And I'd actually had a really good experience with making very easy, intuitive software. I still do. And I can remember talking to my partner in this, and we're trying to figure out how to do this. And it was like, well, we had menuing systems, and we had commands, and we had all that. But we stopped for a second and says, look, like this is great, but this is navigating. This is us looking at the system. What we need to do is look at them. How are they working? And I remember my associate said, well, what we want is they're like at a customer record, and now they want to go to the appointment. They don't want to pull up the appointment book system and then find the customer and all that. They just want to go from one to the other. And we were thinking about that, what they wanted from their operational value stream, basically. And I said, well, why don't we just have a button that if you push it, you go to the appointments. But if you're at a customer, you don't go to appointments, then having to find the customer. You obviously want to see the customer that you're looking at. It's appointment. Oh, by the way, we can have another button that takes us to the tickets, the sales sheet. And you don't just go to the tickets, you go, if you're looking at a customer, that customer's tickets. So we looked at how they want it to work. And man, this was an amazing system. It was just bam, 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 bam. People who'd never used a computer before, we could teach them in 15 minutes. But because we just were emulating how they want it to work. Now, how did this affect the operational value streams? Well, actually, then we had to put in a system that would, as we were doing this, well, in this case, maybe that's just more the customer value stream. But I can also remember at this client, we were trying to support people, and people were just really moving along real fast. And I could not get people to give me feedback for things. I mean, sometimes they would complain about this or that, but mostly they wouldn't tell me what was going wrong. So I can remember I put a trace in. I let them know I was doing this. This wasn't like spying on them or anything, and there wasn't any confidential information. But I put a trace so I could see what people were doing. And the reason I did that is because they didn't want to spend time giving me surveys. And I needed to see what they were doing, but I wasn't there, and we didn't have cameras. That wouldn't be a good thing anyway. So I would then, every now and then, I'd go in and I'd look at these traces. And I could then, this was a kind of support. I could see where they had problems, and I could put things in the system to deal with it. So this whole thing about operations is you have to look at what are the customers doing, how are they working, and how do we support them? Okay. Identifying at the customer and the people who are using your product and provide them easy way to communicate whenever they want how the product is not helping them to improve. What do you say? Well, actually, I think I just answered that question. I would ask them, or I would watch them and see what are they up to and how is the system causing them problems. See, this is the other thing about innovation, is you can talk to people, and that's a good idea, but you got to step back. You got to stop looking at the problem and look at what's the challenge. And there's a difference, because problems already inform a solution in a sense. Like if I see a flashing light behind me while I'm driving, is that a problem? A police person. Well, maybe, depends where I'm at. If I'm trying to go and I'm speeding and I want to get someplace fast and it's just because I want to break the law at my benefit, then it's a problem because I'm going to get a ticket. But as happened to one of my sons, he was trying to get to the hospital because his wife was pregnant and starting to have the baby, and there was this big snowstorm, and this police car pulls behind him wondering what he's doing out driving in the snow like a maniac. Oh, thank goodness. And they went from their car to the four-wheel drive with change state troopers or, whatever it was, police car. And that wasn't a problem at all. See, when you talk about problems, it informs there's some issue here and it implies a solution. So you want to go, what's the challenge? What's my commitment? I want to get to the hospital quick for my wife's benefit. Well, there are different ways to do that. So you want to look at what are the commitments we have, and that creates innovation. Local optimization often results in higher costs. Well, you have to look at that in your own experience. Where has somebody been focusing on getting something done that's causing higher costs? Again, one thing I mentioned is if I've got somebody who's creating requirements, let's say I've got somebody who's creating requirements, and they create requirement after requirement after requirement after requirement because that's their job and they're getting their job done well. But those requirements aren't being used for weeks because he's focusing on just getting his job with requirements instead of maybe spending time with the teams to understand the past requirements. Well, you're just getting old requirements now in the future to the teams. He's optimizing his role of creating requirements, but he's not helping out over the big picture. I would suggest you reflect on this. Reflect on where somebody was so focused on their job they weren't helping other people. They weren't attending to other people and getting their done. They were just doing things way ahead of time. And that caused delays, which caused problems. Is scaling and descaling Agile the same thing? I don't believe in scaling Agile. I believe in doing Agile at scale. That is a big difference. Scaling Agile typically means I get going at the team and then I take my team methods and expand it. You see this with Scrum at scale, Nexus, things like that. They take something that works at a team and now expand it, and somehow they magically expect it's going to work. And they'll talk about theories of fractals and complex adaptive systems, and it's all, sorry, it doesn't apply. You need to look at the whole. So I do Agile at scale. What's the whole value stream? But taking a little piece and trying to expand it's a fool's errand. And it just is done because some people have this idea that team is sacrosanct. No, value add is what's sacrosanct. Taking care of the customer and the business is what we need to be looking at. So I got 3 minutes left. I think I'm going to get to these all. How do we manage waste when we don't eliminate it fully? You don't manage waste. Waste is a byproduct of delays, handoffs, misunderstandings, lack of education, and slow feedback. You manage those things. Those things will lower the amount of waste mistakes happen. So we have to, this is why I don't like the mantra in knowledge work in IT, eliminate waste. I've written blogs on this, by the way. Eliminate waste is a red herring and it gets your eye off the wrong thing. If we start talking about waste, then we're not talking about feedback and delays and all that other things I mentioned. We want to be talking about reducing delays in our workflow. We want to be talking about managing queues. We want to be talking about quick feedback. We want to be talking about lowering handoffs. We want to be talking about how people cooperate better. Waste will go down as a byproduct of all that. So we've got to shift what we talk about so we can see it. Remember I talked about that with Ed Schein. This is why it's very important. You're proposing not to start with POC. I don't know what POC is. So can you put that in the question, the next question, and I'll proof of concept? Is that what that means? Okay, yeah. No, I'm not saying don't start with a proof of concept. I'm saying a team start is not a good proof of concept. You'll be effective at the team. You haven't proven anything because your problem is not at the team. Your problem is at the organization. So I am proposing to start with a proof of concept, but you better be careful. And I love this question, by the way. Thank you so much because I really get how that wasn't clear. So I really, really appreciate that. I'm saying you've got to ask yourself, what would a proof of concept be? What if I succeeded would prove the concept? Getting a team up and running does not prove anything. It will always be an improvement, just about. And I've seen this. I went into companies where they had just accidentally done this and they were getting 3 to 10 times. I saw 3 times. People would tell me otherwise 10 times just by putting them together. Okay? I'm not doing a big bang approach. I'm talking about one value stream. Take an easy value stream. So, and if you can't find the value stream, then do incremental small improvements. But taking a team and getting it to work, if people don't understand why a team working would be better, okay, then do that. But don't think that what you've done has solved anything major because you haven't. Okay. Any quick tips for helping customers get started on value streams? Customers. I'm not sure what you mean by customer here. Do you mean a customer of your system? Well, they don't care. They're just going to look at their work. Just show them it's an easier way. If you're a consultant and you mean customer by a client, then just talk to them about what their issues are. What are the delays causing problems and things like that.